You want
Is
these?
competitive
No,
system.
you don't want-
in the refrigerator.
I keep hearing other stuff going on. I don't know what it is, but
Oh, that's
is,
me.
is that it's built on a system of competition. People get ahead by getting convictions. It often doesn't matter whether the guy is innocent or guilty. As a matter of fact, in the book, I go into some detail with a detective by the name of Scarcella. And what was discovered about him, he was from Brooklyn. He was an award-winning detective. He was considered one of a kind, and you know how great that he always seemed to get a conviction. Then it turned out that basically he got his convictions by planting evidence and framing people. Now we're talking not about a couple of instances, we're talking about dozens of people. He framed, got convicted, and they were sent away. And so, you know, basically what you're talking about, he became, you know, a top detective. He got high in rank. He was given awards as one of the best detectives in the city. And that's because he was framing people. So, I mean, basically what we're saying here, you know, in this question, careers are not made, you know, by people going innocent. And so it's a competitive system. As long as it's a competitive system, it's not going to work very well. Your next question, review how false convictions could be minimized. I wish I could spend some time on that. I don't know how, except to clean it up. I don't know how you cleaned it up. But I mean, I go through, which I will later, 5 types of wrongful conviction. And prosecutorial misconduct or judicial misconduct was one of the main ones. How you clean that up? You clean that up by getting honest people to do that. And you want to look for an honest politician. Diogenes will tell you what it was like going around with his lamp in ancient Greece, looking for an honest man. So, I mean, when you're going to get honest politicians, it basically is something else. And the system is set up so that there is a relationship between the police, the prosecutor, and not so much the judge, but sometimes the judge. He comes from those ranks usually. And very often the defense, unless it's a big case, the defense lawyer is a guy from the public defender's office who probably has 40 cases that he's working on. And sometimes there are instances in the book where the guy comes in, he's given a folder, he never heard about the case before, never met the defendant. He's up against a professional group. What chance is there? So, I mean, it's a competitive system. How you clean that up, I don't know. I mean, you need a whole new system. There are other things that can be addressed, which I'll get into later, that, you know, that might help. But basically, how do you avoid wrongful conviction? I mean, basically, we'd be asking the same thing. How do you get honest political activity? And if I knew the answer to that, it would be wonderful. I would give it for nothing. Write a best-selling book about it. Okay, you got something else? Jenny?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. All right. What were the most difficult parts of writing the book?
Well, a book like this, the most difficult part is the research. One of the things I've learned researching books on the internet is that it's very easy to get wrong information. And if you were trained as I was trained in another age of journalism, beginning in the 50s. I was a journalist, a GA reporter, they call it general assignment. For, I don't know how many of you folks remember INS, International News Service. Raise your hand, will you young folks? I see my friend Dave. There used to be 3 major wire services, AP, UP, INS. As it turned out, at the time I worked for INS, I started as a copy boy, I moved up, a general assignment reporter. But in those days, it was not okay to create errors and apologize the next day. I wanted to get it first. This one, I had 2 minutes to get it on the air. It didn't exist then. At INS, they had a big chart on the wall which said 3 primary rules of journalism. They were accuracy, accuracy, and accuracy. And you didn't get away with mistakes. The first article that they gave me to write was a police story about, I think it was a liquor story holdup or something. And I didn't put the correct attribution in so that the charge stood by itself without attributing it to police. I handed it to the managing editor. He looked at it, crumpled it up, threw it away, never said a word. When my shift was over, he explained what he did, pounding on his desk and telling me that I had 2 strikes on me. If I do it again, I'm out of here. I said, "We need 2 strikes." He said, "The first mistake is 2 strikes. That you can't get away with this kind of stuff." And basically, the other thing they taught you was that you needed a second source. The joke used to be, if your mother tells you she loves you, not enough. You still need another source. You got to back stuff up. So the most difficult thing is finding the information. Sometimes there's a conflict and try to verify it. And there are things that come up that just don't jive. And it's difficult to determine which is which. And I find that the best indicator is that day's newspaper. True, the newspapers make a mistake, but that's a lot better than from somebody's speech or a book or whatnot. There's one instance in here, which maybe I'll get into later, where I found the quote by the then Justice Antonin Scalia, in which he signifies that it's okay to execute innocent people. Basically, what he's saying is that the Constitution guarantees a fair trial. If the trial is fair, there's no judicial error, nothing is wrong, and you get the guy convicted and he's sentenced to death, and they find that somebody else really did it, there's nothing constitutionally wrong with killing the guy anyway. Now that sounded outrageous, even from a guy like Scalia. And so I spent, I don't know, half a day trying to find his statement. I looked to see the source of that quote, and it came from a socialistic publication, which is fine with me. But it's like your mother said, you got to find somebody else. So I found the statement itself, and sure enough, that's what he said. I'll tell you what he said, if I could find it very quickly. He said, "This court has never held that the Constitution forbids execution of a convicted defendant who has had a full and fair trial, but is later able to convince a court that he is actually," in quotes, "innocent." So, I mean, he puts the "actually" in quotes as who says what's actual or not. But basically, I mean, what he says here is, if you had a fair trial, there's nothing wrong with killing him. And a case such as that came up, and he was in favor of continuing the execution. Also, he went on to say in the same statement that there's not a single case, not one exists, in which it is clear that a person was executed for a crime he did not commit. And that's flat untrue. It's wrong in 2 ways. It's not true, and it's also misleading. But that's another issue. I don't know if you want to get into that right now, but that's what I mean. The research is the most difficult part, and confirming everything. You also asked personally what was difficult, which was kind of ironic, because if you read the back of the book, it tells you what happened. Is that I became gravely ill before I finished the book, and I needed emergency surgery. I was hospitalized for a month. I had a home nursing care and whatnot. That was a pretty difficult impediment in finishing the book, but I had an understanding publisher, and once I recovered, I went ahead and completed it. But it was a difficult book to do, in many respects. Now what?
I guess I'm gonna open it up to some of our participants. I have more questions, but I'm gonna let some of the book club participants ask theirs before I ask any more. So with that said, please unmute yourself before you you speak. You're going to ask a question.
So I have a question. I haven't read the book. I will, full disclosure, I got notice of this and I thought this is something I'm very interested in, but I thought I wanted to listen to at least the discussion and will then read the book. But I'm wondering what you think of, I know you're not a legal person, but from the vantage point of these fairness conviction things that people now have, like prosecutor offices now have, like in the city and other places where they're reviewing actual convictions to see were these fair, or if someone's made a claim of, hey, I'm innocent, they look at the evidence all over again to see, because we know that things are biased against certain individuals, or if they didn't have effective counsel and things like that, mistakes can be made. So I'm wondering if you see that as a point, if you think,
Oh, yeah,
to
sure,
help,
sure.
you know,
Yeah,
fix
that's
this.
fine. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just say to help fix this and basically making it mandatory everywhere, because look, I'm an attorney. I don't do I do civil stuff, not criminal stuff, but this is a passion of mine because I see how often this does happen, and it's just incredible, like what goes on. But and no one can be held accountable, whether it's the fact that, I mean, the Supreme Court case that, I don't know if you're familiar with Curtis Flowers, the case that was argued, I think it's over a year ago now, and that he won by a slim majority, where the prosecutor had literally taken him to trial down in the South about 7 times, and there were hung juries, and he violated constitutional things too by having an all-white jury excluding blacks without things like that. And it had to take how many years for this man to sit in prison and finally be vindicated, and now they're not going to retry him because there really isn't anything there.
There were a lot of cases like that. I
Right.
mean, a lot of the cases like this in the book, which are absolutely unbelievable to think that it happened. Also, before I wrote this book, I wrote another book called The Wrong Men. Wrong Men was a study of 102 cases of people exonerated on death row. They had been convicted, they'd been sentenced to die, they were on death row. And with the introduction of DNA, they found that 102 instances where they were innocent. Now that sounds great, way greater, the system works. Well, one of the guys was in prison for 30 years. And he spent part of that on death row, which usually means solitary confinement. And so with the introduction of DNA evidence, it became clear that people were being wrongly convicted. And so my publisher, although I don't think he was my publisher at the time, it was published by Graff, and I can't think of so-and-so in Graff, but Herman Graff was a classmate of mine at Hunter College. And I was not politically or socially active at that time. I was more concerned. I was at Hunter College for the first time. I was in a school with women, and I was playing varsity basketball. I didn't have time for this other stuff. But I got very interested in capital punishment when a sociology professor had us read Clarence Darrow's summation in the Loeb Leopold case. And I became an advocate of opposing capital punishment, which I continued when I got into the news business. I wrote columns, I was on the radio. I got a commendation from the state legislature when they abolished it. And so when DNA evidence became, part of the ordinary procedure, Herman Graff of Carolyn Graff is what the firm was, came to me, and they wanted to put out immediately as fast as they can a book on wrongful death row conviction. And he said, just do it. It'll be like alphabetical order. And I said, it'll read like a telephone directory. Nobody gonna read that. But he came to me because he knew I was interested in the subject. They wanted the book done fast, and they didn't want to pay a lot to get it out in a hurry. So I settled for a fee that got my family free lunch at Taco Bell. And, I went ahead. But as I started to research the book, I said, look, this is deeper than anyone, than I ever thought. And just doing it as a directory is not going to work. And so I fashioned the book where I found 5 major causes of wrongful conviction and broke it down under those headings and found the cases and researched the cases. Now you talk about some difficult stuff. It was 102 cases. And researching it is really difficult. As I say, especially with the old ones, you get conflicting evidence. I had some help. I had, as a matter of fact, Betty worked on those, and I think my granddaughter, my other people, helped me with it, and I had to check it and make sure there were second sources and whatnot. But you had all of those cases, and I said clearly, some people had to be executed who were innocent. Scalia said it's not so, but he was wrong. There were several cases that I could show that the people who were innocent that were executed, but that meant nothing because his statement was also misleading. The fact of the matter is that after someone is executed, all research stops. Almost always, no one investigates any further to find that the guy was really innocent. And so the innocent people are killed and the case is over. And, he goes on like a clown making this judgment that innocent people aren't killed. If there were 102 people on death row that through DNA you found were innocent, what do you think the chances are that no one before that had ever been executed?
Oh,
So that's basically what you were dealing with. And so after that book, I obviously became more interested in the broken system of justice in the United States. And so we came up with Convicting the Innocent, as even if it's not a death row conviction. So you want to know what was difficult, that was difficult. And, I forgot, what was the other question that Eskama was it who asked? Am I leaving something out that I'm supposed to be explaining?
No, I think what we were talking about was, these conviction units, conviction integrity units to help.
Yeah.
Where prosecutors, for example.
With DNA, there are a number of places that I can't think of, and I can't think of the names. I spoke with them, but at my age, names start to elude me, especially the book is 5-6 years old. There's one with two guys. Can anybody think of it? The Innocence Project.
Sure.
It's what
Yeah.
it's called. And I can't think of the fellows' names. I would know it if I heard.
Barry Scheck is one.
That's exactly right.
And,
You got it
Peter
right.
Neufeld, the investigative
Peter
journalist.
Neufeld is right.
Right.
You got that. That's what I've been thinking of.
Yeah.
And they do a remarkable job. It's absolutely, the monuments should be built to them for what they do.
Right.
And so there are instances, so that there is hope somewhere along the way. So far as capital punishments are concerned, it's more and more states have gotten rid of it. As a matter of fact, when I did The Wrong Men in 2003, I have down here somewhere how many. In 2003, there were 12 states that had abolished capital punishment. This book was published in, I think, 2016. By that time, there were 19 states. Now there are 23 states that have abolished it officially. In addition to the 23 states, there are 3 other states where their governors have a moratorium on capital punishment. So that would raise it to 26. There are other states where it's been de facto eliminated, which is to say there hasn't been an execution in 10 years. California has hundreds, literally hundreds, probably 200 or more, maybe 300 people in prison convicted of capital crimes, death row. But they haven't executed anybody in 20 years. It's incredible. They just don't use it, but these people stay on death row. But it definitely by state, it's really, or more than half the states don't use it anymore. The interesting thing about it, not interesting, the devastating thing is what's happening on the federal level. On the federal level, it's gone up for only one reason, and that's because the United States elected a psychopathic thug whose aim is to make America hate again. And he succeeded very well. They changed the hate to something else on the caps, but that's basically what he wanted to do, and he succeeded. You want to talk about incredible statistics. The federal government in history has never executed more people than the states combined. Not until a year ago.
Right.
When there were 10 federal prisoners executed within 5 months. No federal prisoners had been executed for 17 years. 0. He had 10 executed within 5 months, outstripping all the states combined and changing the entire direction of it. So, you know, while we're making progress on the states, you know, I think it's just an aberration. You know, if we don't elect another lunatic, you know, I don't think that'll happen on the federal level. But you know, the states have been chipping away. The problem is that some of the states will never get rid of it. Last year, there were only 7. Is that right? 7 or 8. I think 7 executions state, very low number, and there were just 5 states that were involved. They were Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, and Missouri. They all had, well, Texas was the only one that had more than one. They had 3, but in Texas, executing people is the second most popular sport, the high school football. So Texas is never going to get rid of capital punishment. To get rid of it on a federal level, to outlaw it completely, that would end the state rights and that would end federal execution. You have to deal with the 8th Amendment. And, you know, we've had cases come up like that again and again. I'm looking for some notes here so I don't get stuff wrong. The 8th Amendment, I mean, basically what it says, it doesn't say anything about capital punishment. It just says that unusual cruel and unusual punishment shall not be inflicted. That's exactly what it says. And as a matter of fact, I forgot I brought the Constitution with me. Here's what the 8th Amendment says. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. That's all it says. So now the question is capital punishment cruel and unusual? Now, what the problem arises that you have people like Scalia and a lot of the other nut jobs around now, like Rubio and those wackos, who believe in the original intent. You know, the idea is that these people, the founders, were so brilliant that whatever they wrote is chiseled in stone. All thinking, all progress ends as soon as the ink dried on the Constitution. And whatever exists then, that should be how it's applied now. You cannot extrapolate. Now, on the one hand, think if we applied that in medicine. Somebody comes down with the flu, say, well, we can't give you penicillin because what was written then was the original intent. And so we're going to just, you know, bloodlet you with leeches. See how that works out. That's what we would be doing for medicine. And to do it on another level is the same thing. To decide what existed then as being unusual or cruel is the same thing 250 years later is absurd. First of all, it's definitely unusual because almost every other country has eliminated it. The UN, the 149, I think, nations in the UN, 20% still have capital punishment, I think 20 or 25%. So about 3/4 of the nations in the world have done away with it. That makes it unusual, I would think. But I mean, this is what we have is the kind of interpretation that that the founders were so brilliant that whatever they said has to apply no matter what's changed. Now, one of the extraordinary things, if I can find it here in a minute, is a quote that I found from Jefferson. Let me see. Jefferson, where did you go? Well, I don't know, but anyway, Jefferson, if I find the quote, you know, which I had, he said that the Constitution, some people think it's sacred, as if it's written in stone, and they attribute a kind of wisdom to the originators that nobody really has, and that it shouldn't be that way. The Constitution should be a document that adjusts to time as it passes. So, at least one of the founders did not think that there should be original intent. But, there are people that insist that it be, which I have no understanding why that would be so, why anyone would think that the Constitution was intended to be such a document that it does not address the future as times change. So that's that on that issue so far as new developments are concerned. I think there is being progress made, but I don't think that it came very close. The federal came very close at one point to doing away with. Let me see if it was Breyer who. Oh, here it is, 259, 260. Yeah. Give me a minute, and I think this would be very enlightening. Yeah, it was a case. I think it was in 2014, and the case was not specifically do we abolish capital punishment, but the case rested on whether it should be very much limited in its application. And the court, of course, went 5-4 against. Breyer wrote the dissent. Breyer said this: rather than try to patch up the death penalty's legal wounds one at a time, I would ask for full briefing on a more basic question, whether the death penalty violates the Constitution. In a 46-page dissent that included charts and maps, he said it is highly likely that the death penalty violates the Eighth Amendment. He said there was evidence that innocent people have been executed, that death row exonerations were frequent, that death sentences were imposed arbitrarily, and that the capital justice system was warped by racial discrimination in politics. He further noted that there was little reason to believe that the death penalty deterred crime, and that long delays between death sentences and executions might themselves violate the Eighth Amendment. And not surprisingly, as I put it, Justice Scalia called all of that gobbledygook and introduced original intent. And now, here's the exact Jefferson quote. Some men look at constitutions with sanctimonious reverence and deem them like the Ark of the Covenant, too sacred to be touched. They ascribe to the preceding age a wisdom more than human. But I know also that laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. That was Thomas Jefferson, who knew, at least as much about the Constitution as Scalia. So, I mean, that's basically, if we're going to really get rid of it, we're going to have 5 justices of the Supreme Court who understand the English language and have some notion of the difference between the past and the future.
Perfect. Does anybody else from our audience have a question at this point? Please unmute yourself to speak.
What?
Yeah, I'm just polling the audience to see if there are
Okay.
more questions. I wrote some more. I wanted to talk about a little bit about the incentive to cheat and bend the rules in favor of conviction is built into the system. And this speaks to allowing criminals to testify against others for reduced sentences. What is your feeling on that?
Well, let me extrapolate on that. That is one of the 5 causes of wrongful conviction that I identified. And what that is called, it's called snitch testimony. And basically what that involves one, very often a convict also on death row, testifying against another in return for consideration. It could be a lesser reduction in sentence. It could be coming off death row. It could be anything, any one of a number of things. But snitch testimony accounts for a great number of wrongful convictions. That was one of the five, that I found. You want to hear the others now, or you
Sure,
want to go
yeah.
through this?
No, we can talk. Yes, please talk about the other four.
The other four, yeah. Okay. The other four, one of them is official misconduct, and that's prosecutorial, judicial, misbehavior of the police, the attorney's office, or the judiciary. That accounts for a huge number of cases. Second, and strangely enough, the one with the highest number of wrongful convictions is eyewitness testimony. And I'll explain soon why that happens. A third is false forensics, which are forensics. It's often called junk science. It's forensics that examination, scientific evidence that it's fallible. The fourth is snitch testimony. And the fifth is false confessions, which is a surprising one. People don't understand how many convictions are based upon false confessions, where people confess to crimes that they haven't committed. But you want me to go into go ahead.
Yeah, well, with the last one you just mentioned about the false confessions, I think that goes hand in hand with the age group of a lot of the offenders, so-called offenders, being very young and gullible, not knowing their rights.
That's true. Yeah, it usually is younger defendants who go without representation. They don't have any attorneys available. Their parents are not there, and they listen to the promises that are made. Very often, when there are more than one involved, they divide them, so that you go in here, you go in here. Each one's questioned separately, and then he tells him, your buddy says that you did do this, that you were the one who, and what do you mean? And they rat on one another. The biggest case of false confession that delineates what it's all about, if you remember the Central Park jogger. The Central Park jogger, they had, 5 or so many juveniles that they separated. They testified against one another. They were all convicted and all later found to be innocent when they found the guy who did it. Again, Trump very famously said that they should be executed even after they found the other guy, because why not execute a few more people? They're probably no damn good anyway. But the Central Park jogger case, which I've done some work on, is a classic example of false confession. There are other kinds of false confessions too. I have a number of cases of that. One where the husband or the wife was killed, I don't remember which, and the son was sleeping, and they convinced him that he got up and it's sleepwalking, killed his parent. And often it's done with a hypothetical suggestion. If you had done this, what would you have done? Well, if somebody did that, I would have done. Well, maybe you did do it. Is it possible you did do it and you don't remember? Now, if somebody's 17 or 18 years old and they're being questioned by 3 guys for 48 hours, not the same guys, but they come close to say, well, maybe it is possible. It could be. I'm not asking you, did you do it? Is it possible you did it and don't remember? Now you say, yeah, I guess that's possible. I don't remember. Yeah, I do sometimes, have these dreams, or I walk in my sleep, or whatever. And very often that's used as evidence enough to get a conviction. So, false confession is a big issue, but again, that depends to a certain degree on official misconduct. It's the police who are doing that. Convictions are, they call them collars. I did covered a police beat for a while, way back in the 50s. I was a young kid, and I covered a police beat in the Bronx, all 11 precincts. And so I got to know, some of these guys at the squad. The squad is a detective bureau rather than the uniform. And then, strange things, they all said, there was one precinct, the 4-3, where I got to be a little bit friendly with the captain. And, they all say there were no quotas on anything. He showed me on the inside of the door of his locker, quotas for stuff. Not for murder, of course. They couldn't have so many murder to meet the quota, but, for drug busts. And one of the things they used to do, they had an agreement with a Chinese laundry in the neighborhood that smoked opium on Friday night. If they were short, they would bust 3 people for smoking opium. Now they had a quota for their drug convictions. Nothing ever happened to these guys. They worked everything out, but it was totally corrupt.
Yes, totally.
There were some things. Some things were, it just, witty. I remember one time I was sitting in the squad room at the 4-3 precinct, which is in the East Bronx, the Parkchester area. And I'm sitting there waiting for the 124 man. The 124 man is the guy who has all the notes and has the records on everything. I want to get stuff from him, see if any big cases came up. And, these squad rooms, they have cages inside. So that if you have a suspect who might be dangerous, you put him in a cage while you're processing. You don't have to sit there. So I'm sitting there waiting, and they got 2 guys that, are not in the cage, but that they're just sitting by the side, and they get up and walk out. And so when I'm waiting, one detective said, well, what happens to these 2 guys? I said, they walked out. They walked out? You just let them walk out? I said, I walk out? I let them walk. You're sitting there with a gun. What do you mean? I don't know who the hell they are. They were suspects in this and that. I said, well, you should have been watching them. I wasn't there to watch them. And so they ran, and, and they're telling me that I should have said something. I said, you know what? I think this makes a pretty good story about how you do business and whatnot. Hold on, wait a minute. Now, if it were a serious crime, I think I would have busted them anyway. Well, what were they there for? They were for the GLA, grand larceny auto. They had stolen a car. So, who the hell cares? I'm not going to start a police, riot over 2 guys that probably turn up anyway. But, this is how things went on. Things of all they count are collars. They call arrest collars. And how many collars do you have for this? And how many collars do you have for that? Felony collars are worth more than misdemeanor collars. And they have all of these things, and this is how you move ahead. And if you're a patrolman, you want to go plain clothes, you got to have a lot of collars. And so collars are not much good if there's not a conviction. But sometimes they are. Sometimes collars are made when you're not going to get a conviction, but you're going to be let go. But it wasn't my fault. I made the collar. And convictions, are like the stars that you used to get on your paper in school if you did it right. So, that propagates, the entire system in some way. It poisons it right on down a level. And I don't know how you get rid of that. How do you say, well, we're going to base promotions on something other than collars? I have no idea how that would work. The other interesting thing is that eyewitness testimony is the most prevalent instance of wrongful conviction. And let me see if I can, on page 87, that, it seems odd, but basically, here it is, eyewitness. The vulnerability of eyewitness testimony became the focus of national attention in 1998, et cetera, et cetera. But that's, here. The original identification is often made under unfavorable conditions. The witness was likely to be a good distance away from the accused, who was possibly shrouded in darkness. The glimpse of the suspect was more often fleeting than not, perhaps no more a second or two. And observations made in extreme circumstances, when adrenaline is running high, tend to be untrustworthy. When a defendant is convicted solely on the basis of such testimony, the possibility of error is exceptionally high. That is the cause of the greatest number of wrongful convictions. And then, of course, you have the after misconduct, you have the false forensics. I mean,
Yeah,
DNA.
I was so surprised to learn about how handwriting and fingerprinting
Right.
was so fallible.
Yes. That's what's called false forensics, or junk science sometimes. As a matter of fact, at one point they were using bite testimony, bite evidence.
Yes.
But fingerprints is presumably the most reliable, but even then, it's not conclusive. And blood type is not conclusive either. DNA eliminated most of that. DNA changed everything. Because also people who were freed, people who were held for 30 years and more, some of them were framed. I have a case in here in which Peter Lamone, a guy by the name Peter Lamone, was held in death row, well, not in death row, but on a death conviction for over 30 years in a case in which he was framed by the FBI and principally J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, to me, that was really that I hadn't realized the highness of the corruption. What that it went all the way up to the FBI, and how innocent people were, and they knew these people were innocent, yet they continued to prosecute them and frame them and set them up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Hoover was a totally corrupt man. He was one of the most disgusting people in high office in the history of the country. The idea that there's a building in Washington named for him, named J. Edgar Hoover for the FBI building. I mean, that's as bad as some of these monuments we have to Southern Confederacy. I mean, his name should be taken off that. He was no damn good. He was a foursquare phony. He despised anything resembling justice. He went after Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and anyone who opposed them. And basically, that was part of a huge scandal involving, it was called the something gang. Whitey Bulger was a guy that was involved. They made a movie about him. He died just a few years ago. Whitey Bulger.
And that was that's the Chicago police force, correct?
No, that was Massachusetts.
Oh, the Irish Mafia.
Well, yeah, the mafia was involved. Let me see if I can find quickly who else. It was Whitey Bulger. It was called the Winter Hill Gang in New England. And Whitey Bulger was the big name behind that. And other guys, I mean, nationally known people. What happened is that under Hoover's leadership and tutelage, the FBI was able to get a lot of them to blow the whistle on other people. And they knew that they're going to lose a lot. If those guys are arrested, they're not going to be available to do this anymore. And so Hoover ordered them, not to bust Bulger and these other guys who were involved. And the case came up where they had to get somebody else. And I think there were 4 people that they got. One of them was Peter Lamone. And if I remember, he was the one who was held for over 30 years, was released, was suffering from lung cancer, and died 3 or 4 days after being released. I mean, it was a horrendous story. Went on and on for decades. And Hoover was the inspiration behind this. How much chance do you have if the head of your FBI, who's looked upon as a god? When I was writing a column for a local newspaper I had a lot of controversial stuff where I got some threatening letters and stuff like that. The worst one was when I attacked Hoover. It wasn't fashionable yet. This was before any of this. And I attacked Hoover as being phony. As a matter of fact, I wrote his name as WHO?VER, Hoover. And amazingly enough, that column brought me more hate mail than anything I wrote. As a matter of fact, the police called. My office was on the second floor at the time, at the corner of 72nd Street and Broadway. And they said they got a report that of a threat to bomb my office, which would have been not too hard because it's faced right out there. And he said, you're going to see a police presence around your office for a while. I said, I get a lot of these, He said, the guy, the captain, I guess it was, said, we're trained to know which are real and which are not. This sounded like a real threat. Just over J. Edgar Hoover. So, I mean, that's how sacrosanct he was. And, it leads to a system that, frankly, the system is broken.
Speaking of which, I read 2 books on this topic before reading your book. I have them both here, and they're both available at our library for checkout for you guys to read. The first one is called Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. He runs a project similar to the Innocence Project.
Yeah.
It's called the Equal Justice Initiative. He's based in the South, and he's an Ivy educated attorney whose focus has been getting some justice for wrongly convicted people. And it's a phenomenal book. And he basically says what Stan just said, is that the system is very broken. And so he talks, he really, it goes into some detail with 2 people that were mentioned in Stanley's book. And one of them being Hinton, who spent many years on death row and was helped by Brian Stevenson himself.
Yeah.
And then he did go ahead and write a book called The Sun Does Shine. And so this, I read this after the Stevenson book, and it's from the perspective of a victim, someone who this has really happened to. And so it's very compelling, a very compelling read as well. So I would recommend both of these books. They're here at the library if you want to check them out. And I'm also going to read a quote from Brian Stevenson's book. We have, and Stan had quoted it in his book as well.
I interviewed him.
Oh, okay. So you've met him.
He was a terrific guy. Very helpful.
And in his book, he goes into how, when he's going to see his clients in a lot of these jails, they would subject him to unusual punishment, like make him disrobe and things of that nature just to talk to his clients. And so his quote is, "We have a system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent." Do you want
Anyway, we're getting close to the end.
Okay.
I'd like to read a quote from a guy by the name of David Swanson, who wrote a book called War is a Lie, trying to sum up the whole situation. And he says, civilization is something we no longer seem to aspire to. The United States locks up more people and a greater percentage of its people than anyone else. We lock them in training centers for anger and violence. We subject them to rape, assault, humiliation, and isolation. We throw the innocent in with the guilty, the young with the old, the nonviolent with the violent, the hopeful with those who've lost all interest in life. And we routinely subject numbers of prisoners to the torture of isolation. We lock human beings in little boxes for 22 or 23 hours per day. And then he ends by asking, where is the outrage? And at the end of my book, I respond, the outrage always is slow in coming. When finally it arrives, it seems to have happened all at once, for it tiptoes in, as Sandberg wrote, on little cat feet. It happened that way with women's right to choose, even more so with gay rights and same-sex marriage. But if one looks back far enough and carefully enough, the roots of the outrage and finally the change it inspired can be found in incandescent markers that one failed to heed. And I end by saying, if we look far enough into the future, as hopeful as prudence allows, we might hope to find that prisons, as we now know them, will no longer mar the landscape. No new ones will be built, and those still standing will be raised or turned to more lofty purposes. Penologists of a far distant time might yet look back and know that today we stood on new ground and at a new time, and that when the battle was over, like Joshua at Jericho, the walls came tumbling down.
Well, that is just so beautiful. And thank you so very much.
Thank you.
for
Thank you.
ending on such a optimistic note, because we really do need these changes to come and make it all better. And you were the best today, and I thank you from the
I
bottom
thank you for the opportunity.
of
I
our
appreciate doing it.
hearts for addressing this whole topic and leaving us with, it can be made better, and hopefully will someday soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to promo
Appreciate your
our-
attention.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say our next meeting is the same day, March 8th, next month. And we're gonna be discussing the Dictionary of Lost Words, which, I hope some of you will wanna come back and tell us what you think about that book. Yeah, it's in a similar vein about how words in the dictionary regarding women are often left out. And it's kind of, March is Women's History Month. So it's kind of a timely book too. So I ordered copies. They started to come in. Please visit the library to pick up your copy. And thank you very much, everyone, for coming today, and sincere thanks to Betty and Stan for making
Thank
this
you, Stan.
all
Appreciate it.
possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.